Are India's economic woes a temporary blip or a sign of deep systemic malaise? Hello, I'm Glenn Van Zutphen at NUS Business School. My guest today is uniquely qualified to speak on that topic. He is the former governor of the Reserve Bank of India, Dr. Duvvuri Subbarao. Subba, thank you for joining us today. Let's start initially with the notion that India was once touted as a real economic powerhouse. Recently, it's been described as being in a tailspin. Certain indicators, such as the rupee losing value and others, have pointed to the fact that India has fallen on hard times. What do you see as having been the main problem getting the Indian economy to where it is today?
First of all, thank you, Glenn, for this opportunity of interview on Think Business. You're right that 5 years ago, before the financial crisis, India was looked upon as the next miracle economy. And it's gone into a downturn, but we all hope and we expect and we believe that it is a temporary downturn. And the important cause, bearing down all the details, if you ask me to single out one important cause for the downturn, it is the decline in investment. Investment was going at a rapid pace before the crisis. That's declined. And you recognize that today's investment is tomorrow's production capacity. And I think that's the most worrying part.
Who or what is to blame for that decline?
If you ask me for one or two causes, first I believe would be the governance issues. And the second is the infrastructure constraints. India is unique among countries in the world that we are a supply constrained economy. And the biggest supply constraint is the infrastructure.
Some reports have been warning of a repeat of the 1991 balance of payments crisis. Do you feel like there is a chance that that crisis could return?
No, I don't think we will have a repeat of the 1991 type of crisis. Admit that India is going through balance of payment strains, but these will not develop into a balance of payments crisis of the type we saw in 1991 for the simple reason that today India is far more integrated into the world than it was in 1991. Our exchange rate is largely market driven. Our financial markets are deeper, more resilient. Our reserves are much stronger. Therefore, to believe that India will get into a 1991 type of crisis, I think is very, very far-fetched.
As we look at, from outside of India, as we look at the infrastructure and the political climate and political challenges, they seem insurmountable. Is there any chance that these things can be overcome in a realistic and meaningful way enough to really get the economy back on track?
Oh, absolutely. They're difficult problems. They are big problems, but they're not impossible to resolve. Both governance and infrastructure. And indeed, it is not only important, but absolutely vital that India address both those concerns in order to get investment going, in order to inspire the trust and confidence of investors, both domestic and foreign. And they can be resolved. Countries around the world have done it. India can do it. India has enormous capacity to do this. India has the political will to do this. But some things have to come together to resolve this.
What would have to come together?
Well, currently this uncertainty, there is an economic downturn combined with the electoral cycle, that there is going to be an election in about 8 months from now. As per the calendar, it could be a bit sooner. But once there is elections are behind us, I'm sure that these issues will be addressed with alacrity.
We can't continue this conversation without talking about the disparity of wealth. There is a very noticeable and growing wealthy class and poor class. What role do you see that dynamic playing in the future economic prosperity or the direction of the economy?
Inequalities are there across the world. So you can't single out India for the inequalities. Another thing that you have to recognize is that one of the remarkable things that's happening in India is the improvement in income of the lower income groups. That's a mega trend which I believe is not sufficiently acknowledged.
But correct me if I'm wrong, I saw a statistic that said something like 70% of the population lives under $2 a day.
That is true.
That's, 70% of a billion people is a great big number.
That's true. There is enormous amount of poverty. But what I'm trying to say is that historically, the poorer classes have not had the benefits of growth in India, but that's changing. So what the brightest side of this is that low-income groups which did not see an improvement in their income levels earlier on are now seeing that. And that's one of the, I would say, positive dimensions of the India growth story.
When we look across Asia, if you think back 8-10 years ago, China and India were always mentioned in the same sentence as the drivers of growth, the economic engine of this region. Clearly, China took off, India did not. What lessons can or should India take from the Chinese example?
You're right that China and India were spoken of, they're hyphenated. And it's disappointing that India has lagged behind, while China growth engine is still chugging along. But I believe that India will catch up. The long-term growth drivers of India are still intact. And your question about what we can learn from China, I'm not a China expert, but what a lot of people who know both India and China say is that China delivers on its commitments to investors. And that's something that India has to learn about. You make a promise, you make a commitment to investors, you have to deliver on that.
One of the issues, directly on the minds of many Indians has been the value of the rupee sliding nearly almost 25% against the dollar in the past year, fiscal year. What is your take on that? How did that happen? How can it be reversed?
India has been running a current account deficit,
Yeah.
much above its sustainable value.
Significantly above.
Yes.
Yes.
So there was some depreciation of the rupee programmed into it. That depreciation did not happen even as current account deficit was above the sustainable levels because we were able to finance the current account deficit. But now because of the taper, because of capital flowing back out of India, that depreciation is taking place. So I believe that some depreciation of the rupee was inevitable. How much is of course difficult to say. And as everyone knows, when exchange rates move, there is some sort of overshooting. So maybe the rupee has overshot, correction has taken place. But the short answer to your question is that some depreciation was inevitable.
Many analysts said that it was overvalued anyway and needed some sort of correction. Do you subscribe to that opinion as well?
In a way, I had subscribed to it in the sense that in as much as you're running a current account deficit, if everything, all others being same, the rupee has to depreciate as a self-correcting mechanism. If that did not happen, and that was a correction waiting to happen, and that correction is happening now.
One of the things that you were known for was a tight monetary policy that some said stifled growth in India. Do you agree with that? And secondly, what do you think, or what do you hope or believe is the best way to ease some of those inflationary pressures?
Well, that's not a question to which I can give an answer in 1 minute. I need an hour for that.
Do the best you can.
But the short answer is, I don't believe that all the growth moderation in India that's taken place is because of tight monetary policy.
Okay.
If that was the case, real interest rates in India, even during the tight monetary policy regime, were lower than they were before the crisis. So if your argument is that high interest rates had inhibited investment and therefore stifled growth, that's not the case. The second answer to that question is that yes, some growth moderation is attributable to tight monetary policy, but you can't bring inflation down unless you sacrifice some growth. And that was the case during my tenure as the governor.
You ran into a lot of opposition, a lot of pressure. What was that like? I mean, just from a personal standpoint, to believe that you had the right path forward and yet to run into some pretty severe roadblocks when you were trying to implement
Yes,
your policy.
it's difficult. Policy decisions at that level are not black and white. There's a lot of gray, and you always have to make a judgment. And making a judgment is difficult and becomes even more difficult when there is so much of conflicting advice and pressure that comes your way.
Couldn't one argue, though, that that's probably one of the problems with India, is that there is too much gray, that not enough black and white is being implemented on some of the decisions that need to be made?
I don't think so. Which country, which big public policy issue is black and white? Every big public policy issue, especially in the economic arena, is gray. And it's a question of making a judgment. If it is black and white, you don't need policymakers, you need mathematicians, right, who will just run the model and decide for you.
We talked a bit about China a moment ago, but are there other countries that could be a model for some of the problems that India has in its economic structure right now?
Well, we could learn from other countries' successes as well as their failures. And there has been the Latin American growth surge in the 70s and 80s. We could learn from their success in how they attracted foreign investment, how they opened their markets. But we also can learn from their setbacks, about how they opened too quickly, too rapidly, and therefore had to withstand the backlash. So we can learn from other Asian economies about how they've attracted investment. Just to give you an example, Japanese investment has flown into East Asian economies, but has not flown westward enough to come to India. What is it that other Asian economies could offer the Japanese that India has yet to offer?
When you look at the educated and dynamic and very aggressive talent pool that India has, what are some of the other economic successes that you see and factors that could lead to economic success?
The long-term growth drivers of India are intact. And India's growth drivers are domestic. It's not a small economy that needs the external world for export purposes. We need the external world, of course, because global stability is important for India, but we don't need it from the perspective of, for example, a smaller economy. The capacity levels in India are enormous. For a developing economy, for an economy with per capita income as low as it is, India's capacity levels are very high. The entrepreneurial potential in India is surprisingly huge. To invest in India, as we said, is difficult. But if Indian investors are weathering all the difficulties and still investing, it is a testimony to their enterprise.
What role is corruption playing in this matrix that you've described for us? Because it is a big problem and certainly a big perception for people outside of India.
Corruption is an issue, and there is the reality of corruption, there is the perception of corruption. Perhaps the perception is much more than the reality, but you can't wish away the reality. And there is corruption at high levels, there's daily corruption, there's corruption at the cutting edge level. India has to resolve all this. But one positive side of this, Glenn, is that India is not talking about corruption. It is an issue in politics, it's an issue in democracy. So the fact that it's an electoral issue is itself a positive signal that the corruption issue will be addressed head on.
You've spoken forcefully about the need for inclusive growth. And you were quoted once as saying, growth has no legitimacy if the bottom of the pyramid gets behind. It can be destabilizing if the growth is not inclusive. First of all, do you still believe that? Secondly, do you believe that policymakers, that government leaders subscribe to that and are doing something about it?
The answer to both questions is absolutely. I believed in it, I believe in it, I'll continue to believe in it. And as far as policymakers are concerned, of course they believe in it. Because India is an effective, vigorous democracy. And people get elected only if the 70% of the people that you're talking about, they see the benefits of growth coming to them. It wasn't always the case, but increasingly that's the case, that people are evaluating their politicians, their elected officials by how much they're doing to improve their quality of life.
As you look back, I know you're out of office just a short time. What are some of the lessons that you personally have learned and will take with you from your time at the Reserve Bank of India? Either ways that you could have done things better or just realities of the way things were.
One thing when you're in a policy-making job is you're making policies in real time. People who are analyzing you with the benefit of hindsight. But something that I will take away is that it's important to remain committed to long-term objectives, which is that whatever you do, don't lose the big picture. Keep your ears close to the ground. When you're in an air-conditioned office on the 20th floor of a building, it's easy to forget the implications of your decisions to people on the street. But the important thing is to remember that what you do, what you say, matters to people's everyday lives. And that thing you have to keep remembering.
Subba, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much, Glenn. I enjoyed being on the show.
We've been talking to Dr. Duvvuri Subbarao, who is the former governor of the Reserve Bank of India. I'm Glenn Van Zutphen. Thanks for joining us today.